Hey everybody, Adam here again. Today we're kicking off a new intermediate level SOLIDWORKS course here on CAD Junkie. But before we do that, before we jump into the software, I want to take a big step back and talk about the design process. Because the thing about software is that products aren't designed by software, right? Products aren't designed by SOLIDWORKS. They're designed by people, and SOLIDWORKS is a tool in a broader process. And if we don't understand how that process works, we're never going to understand how SOLIDWORKS fits into that process and how it can make our lives easier throughout it. So let's take a big step back and talk about product design from the beginning, right? When we start a product, we talk about having an idea, right? You have some idea, and then the idea then gets passed along, let's say, to a designer is what a lot of people think. Then you send the idea to a designer. The designer does cool sketches and works out a really cool looking product and tells a story about how awesome the product is going to be and convinces people that it's a great idea, right? And then the designer is going to pass his idea along to an engineer, and then the engineer is going to make it work. He's going to take that flighty, silly thing that the designer came up with cartoon physics, and he's going to make it into an actual thing that works, right? He's going to bring it into the real world. And then he passes along his design to the factory, and the factory is then going to make it real, and they're going to ship it straight to you at your house, and then you have your product, right? So suddenly you have your idea has become a product. And I got news for you, folks. This is not true. That is not how this happens, okay? This is a complete mythology. So you can go ahead and strike this mental model from your brain right now. None of this happens, okay? So let's go back to the very beginning and talk about how this actually works in real life, okay? So in the real world, you have not just an idea. Let's just start at the very beginning here. The fundamental premise that you start with an idea, that's not usually true. Usually you start with ideas. You have a variety of ideas. You have some of them are just nuggets of concepts, just possibilities, crazy thoughts about a new way of thinking about a problem. Sometimes it's a more fully formed idea, but you almost never nail it right out of the gate. There's going to be incorrect assumptions from the beginning. There are going to be things that are wrong with it. And so we're going to have a group of ideas. And then that group of ideas doesn't just get passed to a designer. It gets passed to designers and engineers and marketing people and all kinds of other folks, right? All of the stakeholders in the design process then get past this idea. It's not just designers communicating to engineers. It's ideas that are getting passed to designers and engineers. And then the designers and engineers actually, I know this is crazy sounding, they work together. They actually collaborate, and the designer has an idea, bing, and he's like, hey, engineer, check this out. And then the engineer's like, no, that's terrible. But bing, I've got a better idea, and he passes it back to the designer, and they work back and forth like that, right? And then eventually, all this back and forth leads to a thing, right? It leads to a design, and that design can be passed to the factory, but then, the factory says, there's something wrong, we can't actually manufacture this, so they send it back to engineering, and engineering is like, okay, well, how about, and then you do the back and forth, and you go all the way back to the factory again, and they're like, bing, okay, we got it, and they manufacture it, right? But then after that, then marketing comes back, and they're like, hey, guys, we need to sell next year's product, and then we got to take that, and we got to start over, right? You got to come up with a whole new thing, and it does this whole back and forth thing all the way to the factory, and then the factory sends it back to you, and then you're like, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so it's a mess, right? This is how design actually happens. It is all over the map, back and forth, and around it goes. And that is why we have programs like SOLIDWORKS. They're going to help us make sense of all of this concurrent information flying back and forth. And so as we work this in this course all the way through it, we're going to be making the assumption that changes are going to have to be made. We're going to make the assumption that just because we design something one way doesn't mean it's going to end up that way in the end. And we're going to be collaborating with other people. So as we move forward, let's just keep that in mind. We're going to be collaborating. We're going to be acting as industrial designers in a shop. But then we're going to be collaborating with mechanical engineers and marketing people and all that kind of stuff along the way. All right? So let's jump in and get started.